Thanks a lot. I think there's a number of people on their way to the gallery who are obviously affected by this issue. I just start by giving an example that, as the law currently stands, two children could be born tomorrow, side by side in a hospital. They could go to the same creche, they could go to the same school, they could have the same group of friends, they could have the same interests socially, culturally, etc. They could both consider themselves to be absolutely Irish. However, and this isn't a worst case scenario, we'll get on to deal with some of the worst case scenarios, when they reach 18, one could have significantly less rights than the other. One of these two babies born side by side, growing up together for 18 years, could be entitled to the free fees scheme for third level education. One could be entitled to an automatic right to work. One could be entitled to the right to vote. But the other could be denied the right to access to free third level education. They could be denied the automatic right to work, and they could be denied the right to vote. Why? Because if the second child did not have Irish parents, they could be denied the right to citizenship at birth. This is discrimination. It's discrimination pure and simple. It's discrimination not on the basis of anything to do with the child, anything the child has ever done, but on the basis of where their parents are from. And it's an unjust discrimination which this bill aims to end, and which I hope this House will agree to. Before I get on to the substance of the bill, I want to ask a question about how the Minister is answering parliamentary questions on this issue. Yesterday, Deputy Coppinger received a parliamentary question reply from the Minister for Justice stating that data in relation to those under 18 who were born in Ireland is not captured in a systematic manner, as it is not directly applicable to consideration of the grant of naturalisation. He then outlined that just under 1,400 in 2017 and just under 1,300 in 2018 children were granted citizenship. And while yesterday the Minister said that he doesn't keep records of the numbers of Irish-born children being naturalised, in a reply on the 17th of January 2017, so 2 years ago precisely, the then Taoiseach did outline the numbers who were born here between the years 2010 and 2016, and that figure is 6,500 almost. While the government doesn't seem to, and I'd question why, keep records of this, we are looking at thousands of children affected. The statistics on naturalisation would likely refer to those with parents from outside the EU or EEA. It's likely that there are much more who do not go through naturalisation as they have citizenship of an EU or EEA country through their parents. To outline the provisions of the bill extremely simply and shortly, and I'd welcome those activists and those involved in the Migrant Rights Centre of Ireland. Tina, now at this stage, whose son is directly affected. Tina is a woman who lives in direct provision, whose son was born here, who is not entitled to the rights of those who are born to Irish parents because of the discrimination in the bill at the moment. But to outline the provisions of the bill, it's extremely simple. It removes the changes made to birthright citizenship in the 2004 Act. It re-establishes the entitlement of all people born on the island of Ireland to citizenship and makes consequential changes to other aspects of the Irish Nationality and Citizenship Acts. The 2004 legislation, which this is effectively repealing or amending, was introduced in the aftermath, people will remember, of the citizenship referendum in 2004. That referendum removed the constitutional right to citizenship for children whose parents were not Irish unless provided for by law. We should think back to that referendum, and when we look across the water to the US at the moment, and we look at the fact that Donald Trump precisely has birthright citizenship in his target at the moment, we should look back and think about the Trump-esque, divisive, racist rhetoric that was used at the time of that 2004 referendum. And it was used in an incredibly cynical way by a then Fianna Fáil PD government, a government which was facing heavy losses in the local and European elections that took place on the same day as the citizenship referendum. That was due to the anger that existed on the delivery of public services, and in particular on the health service. People will remember that then Taoiseach Mary Harney was particularly unpopular because of her role as Minister for Health. Senator McDowell, leader of the PDs, was the architect of the referendum. It should be remembered that, unfortunately, Fine Gael at the time called for a yes vote too. Thanks to Irish election literature, we still have the copies of the kind of leaflets that were produced at the time. And so Fianna Fáil have a leaflet which has a very reasonable sounding slogan on the front page: yes to common sense citizenship. But the argumentation in favour of the referendum is nothing short of outrageous. Why change the current situation? People with no real connection to Ireland are arranging for their child to be born in Ireland so they can acquire Irish citizenship at birth. Having an Irish-born child increases the chances of parents who may not have other grounds to be allowed to remain in Ireland. Women apparently with no medical history in the state are putting themselves and their unborn children at risk by travelling to Ireland during the late stages of pregnancy or even in labour. Fianna Fáil didn't use the words anchor baby, but that's precisely what they were talking about. It was an argument that had zero basis in fact, that had no evidence presented to back it up whatsoever, but it was a divisive argument used to distract attention from the crisis in public services and try to blame migrants for the crisis that they were responsible for. We should think back to that, and it will strike a chord when we look at the behaviour of Trump in the US. We won't find a leaflet, interestingly, from Fine Gael in that referendum campaign, because they had a relatively low-key campaign, and the reason for that was given by Gay Mitchell in an interview with The Last Word, where he openly admitted that supposedly anti-immigrant attitudes within the population had motivated Fine Gael's decision not to campaign against the referendum, but to give it passive support instead, and they did so in media interviews and so on. And he bizarrely claimed that the making of public arguments against the referendum was more likely to fan the flames of racism than the quiet passage of this amendment. It was, not a good moment in terms of political discourse in Ireland. I remember the 2004 local elections, European elections, and that referendum well. Somehow the idea was that pregnant women would come into Ireland to go into the horrendous direct provision system that existed then, that existed today, just so they could give birth there. The Socialist Party campaigned for a no vote in that referendum. We argue that people of all backgrounds had a common interest in a united fight in improvement in public services, in pay, for the availability of housing, and the centrality of the need for the unity of working class people, and for everybody to have equal rights, and having a section of people without full rights undermined all working class people. There will be some, undoubtedly, who will say, well, we had a referendum. That outcome of that referendum should be respected. However, I'd say two things in relation to that. The first thing is that the wording of the referendum was clear in that it removed the constitutional right to citizenship unless provided for by law. And so it was clearly up to the Oireachtas to provide for that right in law, which is what we're proposing to do here. And the second key point I'd make is that 15 years have passed since that referendum. And in 15 years, we still have no evidence whatsoever for the racist anchor baby trope, but we do have evidence for the injustice that results from the current discrimination. And that injustice, which I'll outline, has resulted in a very significant, very substantial change of public opinion, where obviously it is true that the 2004 referendum passed with a substantial majority, but current opinion polls suggest that 71% of the population agree with the idea that this discrimination should be ended, that all children should be treated equally and entitled to citizenship. And a big factor in that change in opinion has been seeing these injustices play out in reality. People will remember well probably the case of Eric Ji Yingzhu, a 9-year-old boy from Bray, living in Bray his entire life, from a Chinese, his parents were Chinese, but he was never in China in his life, and people will remember obviously he got a deportation order to go back to China, a country he had never been in. And the result, the consequence was a very impressive community mobilisation. I think 50,000 people signed a petition for him to stay. His local TD and Minister for Health, Simon Harris, came out in support of him against his deportation, and the deportation order was thankfully dropped. But this isn't only a case of stopping those individual cases of injustice, but it's about making sure that none of those injustices can happen any time into the future. And it's not good enough for ministers simply to take up individual cases in their own constituencies. They should be seeking to avoid this injustice altogether. There was another case in the course of 2018, was the upholding of a deportation order against an Irish-born child, aged 9, who unsuccessfully went to the Supreme Court seeking to have his deportation order quashed. That child had sickle cell disease and was being deported to the country his parents were from, would evidently reduce his health prospects. Tragically, that 9-year-old child died last year, and there's no doubt that the stress that his family were put under would not have been an assistance to his health battle. They are the very obvious cases of very deep injustice that result. The other thing, though, is just to bring us back to the start of the comparison of the situation of the two different children born side by side, and to warn and highlight for the government that there is a ticking time bomb of a problem here, which is as those children who were born from 2005 onwards approach the age of 18, the impact of that discrimination is going to become clear and for all of those, where in terms of the right to free education, free third-level education, free fees, in terms of the automatic right to work, and obviously in terms of the right to vote, that injustice will become clear. Our bill relates to restoring birthright citizenship, and the aim of the bill, as I've outlined, is to end the current situation of discrimination based on the parents of the children. But I would also say that if we are successful in passing second stage, and we hope that the parties in this Dáil will support our bill, that at committee stage we would bring forward an amendment that would outline a route to citizenship rights for children who are not born here but come here as children. This is a particular area that the Migrant Rights Centre has done a lot of work on, and they estimate that there's between 2,000 and 5,000 undocumented children in this state. These are young people who know Ireland as home, but because of their parents' status have not got a status themselves. They can attend primary and secondary school, but they have an uncertain future when it comes to employment and education. And Ireland is unusual in the EU for not having a real pathway for regularisation, a so-called Dreamers scheme, as they have in the US, and which is obviously under attack from Donald Trump at the moment. Here there is only humanitarian grounds, which is linked to deportation orders being issued, and if unsuccessful, a deportation order will result. And so we will bring forward an amendment, if we're successful at second stage, at committee stage, to give a legislative basis to citizenship rights for all children living here. Final point I'll make is just to call on the TDs of all different parties in this House to avoid hypocrisy. We sometimes hear people saying very thankfully, well, it's good we don't have any racist politics in Ireland, etc. Well, one, I don't think that's the case even, unfortunately, today. But look back at the kind of rhetoric and arguments used by the mainstream established parties in this country in 2004. It was absolutely disgusting for very narrow short-term political gain. But I'd also call for an end to any hypocrisy in terms of politicians who will speak about the interests and the needs of the undocumented Irish in the US, but don't speak about the needs of the undocumented in this country. Politicians who will oppose attacks on birthright citizenship in the US, but perhaps will turn a blind eye to the current situation in this country. Finally, this is about ending discrimination from the point of birth. It's obviously part of a wider struggle against racism and discrimination, for an end to the horror of direct provision, for an end to racist immigration controls, and for a united struggle of all working class people, regardless of background, regardless of ethnicity, for decent public services, for investment in housing, for decent jobs and a decent future.
Deputy, would you